Okay, well, we've just hit 12:30, so wonderful to see lots of people joining. And just as everyone does get online, I'd just like to say hello and really glad you could all join us. My name's Natalie Eggleton. I'm the CEO with Ftripler, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Christian Mansfield, the CEO of Seer Data and Analytics, and we are delighted to be sharing with you today the findings of the Heartbeat of Rural Australia study and giving you a walkthrough of the amazing Seer Data and Analytics platform, which enables you to go and play with the data and use it for your own purposes. So today is really about distilling those. Just a reminder that we are going to be recording this session and that we will be making it available online in the next few days. So just be aware of that. And we will have time for Q&A towards the end, but please, as we're going, please do pop your questions in the Q&A function down the bottom of your screen. And we'll get to those as we go, but also have some time at the end for hopefully some good diving in to what it means for your organisations and your communities. So thanks, James. We might go to the end, to the next one. So just before we get into the session and the agenda, I of course would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting on today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm joining you today on the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people, and I of course pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing care for this country over the last 60,000 plus years. If you would like to pop in the chat where you're coming to us from today, that would be wonderful. Get a feel for who else is on the line, and we'll get going from there. So the session today, as I said, is really about taking you through the research findings from the Heartbeat of Rural Australia study, which is the first study that we have undertaken of this nature at Ftripler. And we will dive into the key findings, and then Christy will take you through how to use the data to tell your story and how to really take advantage of this data set for you. And then we'll get into some questions and answers. So again, just remember the Q&A function is there, and loving all of the chat going on there, and it's great to see some familiar names on the call as well. Really great to have so many coming from right across the country too. It's wonderful. So we've got a couple of polls to get us started and get a bit of interaction happening as well. So we've obviously got the where are you joining us from in terms of traditional country. We're going to also ask you, just so we get a visual of where you all are, and also a sense of who might have actually completed the survey. So I'm going to launch that, and while we're just getting going, hopefully that has come up on your screen. I think you just simply click it and submit, and we'll get a sense of where you're all coming from in a moment. I'm getting a good sense so far. No one from the NT yet. G'day Megan, just saw your name pop up in the chat there. Good to see you. Alright, and lots of you didn't participate in the survey, so that's really interesting that we've got, so far, we've got 25% of you have completed the survey, 65 haven't, and then 11% have, but someone else in your organisation has. So that's super interesting that we've got folk who are going to be looking at this data probably for the first time, because you might not have seen the questions. Great. We've got a few coming in from the NT, a few from SA, TAS, which is great, and then most of the country is looking pretty good. And we're pretty much at full. We've got, I don't know if anyone's used those polls before, but they're quite fun. We're going to do another one a bit later on. So fantastic. I might just stop it there. We're pretty close. We've got almost everyone answering, and it looks like generally we've got the majority of people haven't participated in the survey yet. So hopefully this will be really insightful for you as we get through it. Fantastic, and hopefully that gives you a sense of who else is on the call as well. So I'm just going to stop that one. And share the results. Can you all see that? You got that popping up for you, Christy?
I can see that.
Great. Yes.
Thank you.
All right. So there we are. Got 31% from Vic, 18% from Queensland, 38% from New South Wales, and the balance in other states, and then 64% if you haven't done the survey. So there we go. I'll close that one out. All right, so thanks for participating in that. It's always good to just get a bit of a feel for who's in the room in those virtual sessions. So for those of you that might not know Ftripler or have engaged with us, we are a national charitable foundation that is specifically focused on ensuring the social and economic strength of remote, rural and regional Australia. And our model is really simple. It's about aligning government, philanthropic and community capital purposes and investments to achieve more sustainable and vibrant regional communities. So we work as a partnership mechanism. Part of our work is about providing granting and capacity building support. We also do work like this, which we call Insights and Learning, which is about trying to really amplify the voices and the experiences of rural communities and help to get that lived experience into decision-making hands to influence better outcomes for communities. Thanks, James. So that probably is a nice segue into why we undertook this study. We've been around for 21 years now. We've distributed over $130 million in funding to mostly grassroots organisations across Australia. We do have a focus on particularly locally led and community led organisations and initiatives, and we've funded about 16,000 odd projects across the country in that time. And we have always had a very strong passion and a strong sense for the value of those organisations in the economic, social, cultural vibrancy of Australia as a whole. And we've also observed, of course, in the last couple of years that we've been experiencing successive and pretty much cumulative disasters, and some areas of the country have really not had a break from that pressure, with COVID coming on the top of that. So we were really interested in the story of what's been happening at the grassroots and really interested in how to place a greater value on the role that these organisations are playing during such huge disruption, such huge and constant disruption. We also sought to develop and offer a data-led platform for distilling that. The qualitative story is really critical, but we wanted to back it up with data and hard quantitative evidence. So hence we have partnered with SEEIT Data and Analytics to enable that part of the initiative. And so it's really about amplifying what are often unheard or hard to reach community voices, and to amplify the needs, the gaps and the opportunities that exist for supporting those organisations and those communities. And we really also wanted to develop a tool that could help organisations of this nature, of these localised small grassroots organisations, to actually build their capacity to attract resources and to build their capacity to drive their agendas locally and be resourced to do that. So the Heartbeat of Rural Australia study was born from that identified need. We put the survey out in September and had I think what is considered a very strong response of 638 survey responses from across the country. So you can see there the geography of where responses came from. So we think a relatively good spread, given especially what's been going on in the country and the amount of pressure that has been experienced by communities and community groups. Pleasingly, more than half of the respondents had a turnover of less than $50,000, and from our perspective that is positive, because we were trying to really get to those very local organisations that are quite small and often completely volunteer run. So the data is really telling us an important story about this particular cohort, but we also are getting a picture about the sort of more smaller to medium-sized organisations as well. Of interest, 61% of the respondents were actually board or committee members or equivalent, so it tells us a lot about the role of governing committees in these organisations and the huge role that they're playing as well. I'm just being told there's some background noise coming behind me, and I can't hear that, but if others are, please let me know and we can try to do something about that. Hopefully it'll be okay. Thanks, James. So as I said, the respondents largely very small organisations, but also importantly entirely voluntary. So no paid staff whatsoever. 59% of respondents. Only 38% of them are registered charities. And so in the not-for-profit and philanthropic sector, that's actually quite significant because it means that not-for-profits are playing very diverse roles in their communities, and they're not necessarily able to fit within one neat charitable status. And they're not always actually charities. They might be the likes of economic groups, progress associations and development groups, which are not categorised as charities, but nonetheless are not-for-profit and do incredible work in their communities. And that probably reflects the 73% of respondents being incorporated associations, so those very grassroots organisations. The breadth of focus areas there is really interesting, and it tells us about the breadth of roles that these organisations play and the spanning that they do across all parts of a community, from its social and economic, community wellbeing, environmental, all of the facets that actually hold a community together and strengthen a community. Thanks, James. So, further to that, when we dug into the data, we found that a really large percentage actually play an economic role in their community. And that's quite often unrecognised or under-recognised, particularly when we think about grassroots organisations. And when we think about the types of things that are included in that, it was things like advocating for new community projects to be delivered in their towns, developing projects that created employment opportunities in a region, providing local business support or training, so developing skills and capacity within local small businesses, supporting community infrastructure, so really getting money actually coming in and stimulating financial and economic activity, and encouraging tourism to regions, which is a huge undertaking, and we know a valuable part of the economic system in rural towns. So there's a really core and financially valuable role that these organisations are playing. And then unsurprisingly, pretty much all of the respondents play some kind of social and cultural role. That includes everything from volunteerism, which we know strengthens social cohesion and participation and inclusion and sense of belonging and connection. It also gets a lot of stuff done, which we know. Activities that maintain mental health and wellbeing, activities and programs and initiatives that support people to be more connected and reduce their social isolation, and developing learning skills and building knowledge within communities were all part of that makeup of organisations. And if we think about what that means for a small town or for a remote community or even a regional area, it's profound, the difference that having access to these types of opportunities can have. Thanks, James. And so what would happen if they didn't exist? If we think about the breadth and the depth of that role and the value that they bring, and we think about what would happen if they didn't exist in a community. And this slide shares just some of the quotes that were received back in the survey. And I think they're sobering, and I think they're powerful, and I think that they should be shared far and wide to help amplify the story of these organisations. In some cases, the community simply would not exist, is what we heard, or at least not as it currently does. Because many organisations play many multiple roles, they would just not be able to do all of the things, and people wouldn't be able to live well in their community. Often people would have to go elsewhere, sometimes far and wide, to actually access what are quite basic human rights. And so these organisations are, I think, worth celebrating and worth championing, perhaps more than they are now. Thank you, James. But they've been doing all of this in the last couple of years through immense disruption and constant challenge. And when we think about those roles that they're playing and what would happen without them, and think about what they've been taking on in the last couple of years, particularly areas that have had successive or cumulative disasters, it's not surprising to see the words on that screen there. Now, they are quite sobering, I would say, but there's also a sense of hope amongst the fatigue and the frustration. The onset of the pandemic certainly weakened the ability of community organisations to play their role in their communities. the reduction in fundraising capacity, in local sponsorships, etc., and the pure fact of being restricted in running activities has meant that they've lost vital income from funders and supporters, and in many cases they just haven't been able to do what they are well placed and set up to do. But despite the challenges, as I said, I think that there is optimism, and some of the commentary that we received and some of the words on this word cloud here do tell us that there is a sense of hope and a sense of commitment to actually getting through this and taking what we can from it and trying to evolve and become stronger from it as well. So for just over a third of respondents to the survey, they've found more efficient ways of operating, and they've had more focus on the needs of their communities during the lockdowns. But on the other side, a quarter couldn't find any upsides from the COVID restrictions, and particularly all of the cumulative disasters. So there's a double-edged or a two-sided story to the last couple of years. But what we can see on that chart to the side there is that a very significant percentage of respondents have been affected by successive and multiple disasters, and that is causing immense fatigue, uncertainty, frustration, and exhaustion. And the overriding sentiment that Ftripler is hearing through all of our conversations with community groups is the fatigue and just the exhaustion playing out. And so we hope that this study will actually assist in adding some weight to their work and getting some resourcing where it's needed. Thanks, James. Next one. Thank you. And so underscoring some of those challenges and that fatigue is that for organisations that are largely volunteer run, they've actually had fewer volunteers. And those with paid employees have had their staff working longer hours to meet the increased demand. So we've had a lot of organisations trying to recruit more volunteers, but not many have had an increased interest in volunteering. So there's a real supply and demand issue in the most simplest terms. There's also a question around skills and alignment and fit-for-purpose opportunities to volunteer in an environment of lockdowns and COVID restrictions in particular. Unsurprisingly, and anyone that's been following the news around the regional migration story, 70% have found it harder to attract or retain paid staff. And that is heavily linked to a whole range of other systemic challenges, including housing, infrastructure, livability, etc. But it's also just a very thin employment market because we have got more people here in the country and we've got more activity and more service delivery happening, particularly in the not-for-profit sector. So that's, I think, a challenge and one that we need to be cognizant of when we're particularly organisations like Ftripler and policymakers thinking about funding organisations to really be aware of the pressures and the structural barriers that they're experiencing. Thank you, James. So there are three real areas that the survey dug into in terms of where these impacts were being felt in particular. And they looked at the operational level, the workforce level, and the financial level. And somewhat unsurprisingly and related to the previous slides that I just shared, the biggest issue around operational impacts was the uncertainty around future restrictions. So just the ability to plan is holding organisations back from being able to do their work. And the reduced ability to hold fundraising events, which is one of the major fundraising drivers for rural communities and for smaller organisations in particular. If we think about festivals, if we think about sporting events, the annual ag show, events like that bring really, really much needed revenue into organisations, and it's just not been able to happen. So that's a bit unsurprising, but it also gives us something to focus on in the what to do section. Workforce impacts, as I just said, volunteer fatigue has been the overriding sentiment, but also obviously just not having enough people. It is simply about not having enough people in some cases. And when it comes to the financial impacts, we've been hearing through the survey that red tape in accessing funding is an enormous hindrance and barrier. And in some cases, a barrier to even applying for funding because it's just too much administrative work. And of course, the rest around declining revenue. So keep moving forward, James. And of course, the other critical and well-known issue that this survey highlighted was the digital divide. What we think is really interesting and helpful about this survey is that we got beyond just the regional metro divide and definition and actually started to understand the divides that actually even exist within regional Australia when we think about the access that remote communities have in comparison to regional areas. There's quite a lot of difference. And when we think about the degree to which organisations actually have access, it's pretty appalling, and it's really something that is creating an absolutely unlevel, uneven playing field for regional Australia. It is affecting everything, and for not-for-profit organisations that are operating in rural areas or remote areas, sometimes it's actually that an organisation might have digital connectivity in town, but that their clients and their volunteers don't in their home, or they're in regions where it is really unreliable. And so the participation capacity and the ability to actually contribute is immediately hindered, just simply courtesy of access. So as you can see there, it's a pretty concerning picture. And the sentiment is about being forgotten and left behind, which we obviously can't let happen. So the other piece of feedback through the report is that it's not just about better internet. It is a big part, and coverage is a major problem, but there are other barriers, and it is about the cost of equipment and the cost of servicing that is higher for those in remote and rural areas. There is also a need for training and support of volunteers and staff in new digital technologies to help them get on board with the new way of doing things. So there's a bit of work to do. Even if we get the right connectivity, we still then need to provide that additional capacity building support and appreciate that it costs more to do business in regional Australia. It just does. And technology is one of those. You generally have to pay more for all of the Wi-Fi access and all of the connectivity options there can cost more as well. Thanks, James. So, a lot of this report was about helping those wanting to fund regional communities and not-for-profit organisations to understand what's actually needed and what they could be doing better, differently, more, less. And the feedback is pretty simple, really. It can be quite small changes, quite small practical changes that could make a huge difference. The really top line feedback was about just simplifying grant application processes, making it easier to apply, appreciating that organisations don't always have the same information, and they don't always have access to everything that's being asked for on hand, because they might be operating in different ways or might have very remote and dispersed places and people. It's harder to get quotes for items that are in budgets, for example. It's harder to get 3 quotes even. Sometimes it's just a chance of getting one might be all that's possible in a regional or remote area. Of course, longer term and ongoing funding, and underneath that I think is the message about funding core operating costs. And to my comments earlier, we need to appreciate that it costs money to run these organisations, and we can't really expect that they run on nothing. And so there's a clear and very strong call to action from this survey that the core operating costs of these grassroots not-for-profit organisations is really critical, and it's extremely hard to fundraise for. And not many funders will actually support that. And so that ends up being a huge burden on the organisation. We've heard about liability insurances and the like, presenting big challenges for community groups to raise money for. They are quite expensive, and they can be prohibitive to them doing their work if they don't have that money for them. So we will be certainly listening into that one and thinking about how we can advocate further around that. Thanks, James. And of course, it is more than money, and it is more than getting grant support. But the question becomes: is it more than money, and is it different types of money as well? So, one-off grant funding for projects are, they can improve the ability to deliver services effectively. 83% of respondents said that one-off grant funding can help, but they also said that more flexibility in how that money is used would actually enable them to better meet the needs of their communities. And so that's a call to greater flexibility and greater openness in how the money can be used. There's also a concerning stat that only half of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that funders actually listen to them and consult them about the issues affecting their communities. And that's a bit concerning given, they are the leaders, you are the leaders of your communities. And 45%, which is a similarly low number, believe that funders are open to conversations about how the funds could best be used. So really designing the allocation of funding with that community in mind and actually understanding from the source how it could best be used. Only 45% believe that happens. So I guess the feedback is that there's an opportunity for grant funding to be more focused on the people and the organisation than just the project funding. There's a need for further training and support to help run their organisations, and that included things like grant seeking support and grant writers in communities who are paid to help community groups do that. And then the other piece was about actually finding ways to network with each other and learn from each other, because you're all working in your communities, often dealing with the same challenges and often coming up with really great ways to get around them. And so there's a real call for greater connection and joining up together so that you can learn from each other and get further faster together, I think is probably the potential there. So in terms of what Ftripler will do coming out of this survey, there's a lot to get through, and there is a lot more in the data than even I've presented today, but we have a few areas that we're committed to taking forward from this. And that is that we will continue to advocate and use this report to really amplify the voice of this sector and to amplify the value that this sector has in the economic, social and cultural fabric of Australia and of their communities, and really advocate for better funding for those organisations. Ftripler's place to do that, but we're limited in what we have, so we'll be advocating for greater capacity there. And really thinking about how we can actually play a role in connecting both communities and community leaders with each other, but also thinking about how we might be able to link in trusted providers around skill development and capacity building, similarly to what we're doing here today with SEER Data and Analytics. And so the other thing we're doing, obviously, is partnering with SEER Data and Analytics to support community groups to access and leverage the findings and the data, and to use this data to tell their stories and to really generate more support for their work. So, in saying that, I'm very pleased to hand over to Christy Mansfield, who is going to take you through the data platform and give you a bit of a walkthrough of how you can use this data. So over to you, Christy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Natalie. Thank you for that presentation. It was incredible, the work that's been done, and I would love to acknowledge our partners in this as well, the X Factor Collective Foundation and Survey Matters. And Brenda, thank you for answering the questions. And if you do have any further questions for Brenda, please drop them in the Q&A and the chat. I would love to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I'm coming to you from today, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and we get to work with so many emerging data leaders. It's exciting to do that, and I'm very pleased to be able to share with you today the work that we've been doing to make the data set available on SEER and how you might be able to use that for your advocacy work. Next slide, please, James. But before I do that, it would be so helpful to understand a little bit more about how you're currently using data in your grant seeking advocacy work. So I'm going to launch the poll here for a moment and invite you all to please let us know if you are using data in your grant seeking and advocacy work at the moment. And so fascinating to see that all the time is coming up as an important measure, regularly sometimes and never. So when I'm looking at that, I can see almost 2/3 of people have already voted. Thank you for doing that. And I guess what I'm seeing is it's split perhaps, but it's fantastic to see that so many people are using data in the grant making process. I'm going to end the poll now, and share those results with you. And the results were, we can see 40% are using data all the time, absolutely brilliant. 1/3 of people regularly, and perhaps sometimes or never. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for that. So our role as a tech company is to help people really work with data, particularly at the grassroots and in local communities, with all of you. And I can see some familiar faces, people who are familiar names who are already working with the SEER platform, to really use that for understanding context and then facilitate data sharing in local communities to help communities have greater control and better conversations in collaborations, whether that's with local community organisations or with policymakers across the board. And what we're finding is that data can be a really important tool for not only decision making and advocacy, but also for continuous learning and shared learning in your community. So this is the work that we're aiming to do around making data more accessible and available. So we were really delighted when we had the opportunity to work on this project together with X Factor Collective and Survey Matters and with Ftripler to make the data accessible to you all. Next slide, please. I'm going to walk you through in a moment all the assets that are available to you in SEER, and it is free for you to sign up and use these assets and to use the publicly available data that's available in the SEER platform. So all of the data and the insights that have been gathered through the study, the Heartbeat of Rural Australia study, are available on the platform for you. So you can analyse that data, you can look at the key findings, you can download that information, you can use the graphics and insights if you need to or want to in your storytelling. You can also duplicate and edit that this information to make it relevant for your local area. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment. Not in too much detail. We have a masterclass coming up for people who are interested in learning how to do this more. You can also collaborate with your team on the findings in the platform, share the evidence base, and look at all the other assets that are in the platform. So I'm really, once again, grateful for the opportunity to work with Ftripler to make this data available for you all. Next slide, please. So I'm going to jump into the platform in a moment. What I'm going to show you, and I'm going to drop this into the chat box right now. And that is how you can access the platform and the resources page. So that link, you can access the platform and the resources I'm about to show you in the SEER platform through that link. So I'm going to just very quickly then, James, if it's okay, share my screen and show you what the resources are. So when you jump onto that link, you'll see this page. You can download the report. There, as you know, there's the webinar today and there's one coming tomorrow as well. Thank you once again to all the partners. Really appreciate all the effort that's gone in. On this page, you can join for free, and you can have as many as 5 people in your organisation where you can collaborate on working on insights together. Natalie has introduced the work and the objectives of the study through the video here. So that's a great introduction, and you can share with others who haven't been able to make it today. There's a video on how to use the SEER platform if it's your first time and first experience. So jump in there and learn more. You can access the insights which I'm about to show you, read the media release, and if you do have a SEER login, please jump into the direct link here into your login. And some other resources, just more videos on how to work with the platform to make that data really useful for your advocacy and grant making purposes. So that's all that I wanted to show you in terms of the landing page. When you do join SEER, you'll be coming into the homepage. And in this case, we are sending you information that we've found that might be relevant for regional and rural communities. So in particular, you'll see some insights and updates from different publicly available data, as well as the Ftripler data set that could be of use to you or some of the people that you're working with in collaboration in your organisation or your partners. There's a couple of things to point out. The key thing is our featured suitcase, which is the suite of insights we've created with the Heartbeat of Rural Australia dataset, along with other resources, including the Community Indicators resource that you can use for your advocacy and for your storytelling efforts. But also, there are a number of other featured suitcases in here that can give you a really good sense on other information data that you might want to use, including, for example, the Seed Giving Index. And this is a piece of work that our data science team did to work out the propensity to give, the likelihood of people to give time and money in their local area. This also goes down to the local suburb area, and there are more than 2,000 suburbs that we're able to give you data, publicly available data, and the Seed Giving Index data available if you want to create a story that's relevant for you. So I'm going to jump into the suitcase here, and very quickly, what you can learn is more about the study, and this is shared with you, as I said, in the pre-packed suitcase area. You can learn more about the study from Nat. You can listen to Nat and my conversation on our podcast, The Foil, which has just gone live today, a deeper dive conversation around really some interesting information on the role of community organisations and your views, Nat, on the social capital of community organisations and what they do. The key findings are in here, and then we have a number of what we call suitcases and insights. Here, there are 5 folders that you can jump into, and this is where all the data and the insights sit for you. You can look at this information. You can also see and download the data itself. So in this case, I'm looking at the baseline information from the survey. And what you can do is jump in and see that the details of this data. You can see the insight, and you can also see the actual data set itself, if that's useful for you. Helpful to potentially look at, for example, what your organisation is, how you benchmark compared to others, and pull some of that data and insights out for you. I'm going to go back to the main page, and I do just want to remind you that when you jump into the suitcase and the suite of insights, there is an explainer video on how to work with the platform and how to use it. One thing that I'm really keen to show you is just a little richer information, and the report is incredibly detailed. There's a lot of information in there, but having access to the raw data in some cases lets you explore that and lets you compare yourself to others, and potentially also lets you see information that perhaps wasn't published in the report. In this case, I was really alarmed, of course, and I think we all would be, to see this result of the digital divide. 1/3 or 29% of organisations reporting that they rate their internet access extremely unreliable, or only 29% rating it as extremely reliable. The detail here is quite useful, particularly if you are, for example, looking for grants or grant seeking to address this gap. And I think that you could jump in and pull some of this information out as it's relevant. As we know, the report showed that 87% of organisations play an economic role, and almost all organisations surveyed in the study play a social and cultural role. And part of what those of you those of you that are using data already are most likely also using publicly available or open data to help tell the story of your location and your town. So one of the interesting insights and suitcases here is a template of community indicators that you can replicate and edit for your own area. As I said, they go down to 2,000 locations. There's a video here that helps you understand how to do that. And these insights cover publicly available data that's relevant to youth and education, employment and income, housing and homelessness, caring in the community, and general demographics. So quite a lot that you can learn in here. And you can see it's a lot of information in relation to education, unemployment. This data is what is the most, it's the most up-to-date publicly available data for your location. I'm just going to very quickly show you how you might use that. And once again, I really encourage you to watch the videos or jump into our masterclass session, which is happening next week. I'll share that with you in a moment. What you can do on these action buttons is to duplicate this information and the entire suite of content. Once that's duplicated, it's shared with you privately in your private environment. If you'd like to duplicate it, you can edit any of these insights and suitcases. You can see now I'm the owner of this, and you can edit this information to look at what's interesting for you, or you can also download it, duplicate it, download the actual data, or the graphics as well. The thing that you can then do is, once you're happy with the story that you're telling, and once again, we can share that with you and teach you how to do that for storytelling. And once you are happy with that, you can also share that publicly as a link. So you can edit your own content, put in your own stories, add your own videos, tell your data stories with the heartbeat data as well as the public data that's available. And then you can share this link to other people. So I've just dropped that public link into the platform, into the chat, so you can see how that's possible. So I'm going to stop the share now because I can see there's quite a lot of content and questions coming through, and perhaps, James, we could go back to the presentation. Thank you. So just to recap, I've dropped the portal page, Ftripler's portal page, into the link. You can sign up for free, access all the assets and a range of resources. And I've given you a very, very quick view on what you can do with those resources and that data. But to learn more, we'd really love for you to join us for our masterclass, and where we'll be stepping through with you how to localize the templated insights that I just showed you, the community indicator insights, how to edit the storytelling dashboard so you can tell your own stories, add your own video, your own content, your own branding, all your colors, and then use that as a tool for storytelling, particularly if you want to use that for advocacy with your local collaborators, local members, local contacts in intergovernment and or philanthropics. And similarly, when you are doing grant seeking applications, we hope this data is pretty helpful for that advocacy piece. So we hope that you can join us for that, and really appreciate the chance to walk you through that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Christy. And we will be able to, I think, share these slides just in terms of registration and send out some information to those who have registered, I believe, so that people can register for that. But obviously get in touch with Christy and her team as well if you want to know more. Christy, that is just wonderful, and I think it's a really powerful tool and a powerful platform, and what a lot of good can come from data, and having access to data and being able to really drill in to localised data is really powerful, I think, as well. So I'm really hoping that those online and the broader community will get on board and draw on that. So we've got a few minutes left for Q&A, so please, I'm aware quite a few have been answered through the discussion, which is great. But we've got one question up here, which is for Ftripler, and that is, what findings have surprised us most from the survey? I would start by saying we had quite a few assumptions about what we thought would come through in the survey findings, and I don't think anything came through that we didn't expect to hear. But what we were surprised by was just how much of an economic role we were able to quantify through this survey. It's always been a fairly anecdotal and hard to measure role in terms of things like festivals and events, or providing training and getting new projects developed in towns. And that's been surprising, I think, in terms of just how strongly that came through. And I think how strongly we were able to hear from the group that we were trying to reach, because they're not always easy to reach, and people are time poor and people have got huge fatigue, as we found in the survey, but they were still willing to fill in the survey, and really, that was we were so grateful for that, because we do think this is an important platform, but we weren't sure how much we would get back. So there'd probably be a couple of things that were surprising. The other question is for you, Christy and Sia. So what data set do you think will be most used by community groups, and where should they start first?
Great question. Thank you for the question. We actually know what data sets in our platform are used the most, and interestingly, the top 5 data sets, because we can see this really helps inform us how we should be focusing on bringing in publicly available data that's most useful to people. The top 5 data sets are, not surprisingly, the census and the ABS data by region data set. That's because those are the 2 largest publicly available data sets that go down to a local level. And we really are trying to solve that problem of data access to a local level. Some of the issues that we see with open data is it's only available at a state-based level, and many of you who've worked with data in the past will know how frustrating that is, and how important it is to be able to tell a very local story for what your needs are and what you're trying to achieve. The other data sets that are used quite frequently, because they are available at that local level and are updated fairly regularly, are the data that relates to labour and employment, and labour stats and employment. The Department of Social Services DSS payments data set is also really interesting, particularly if you're wanting to understand specific needs for perhaps different cohorts that you're supporting or working with, and what's happening in your community. And then, of course, the other data set that's fascinating, and these are all different state and territory data sets, is the crime data. And particularly for people who are working in local communities who might be supporting people with the well-being and isolation issues, or family violence issues, that data set really does give a strong pulse. Those data sets, really do give a strong pulse on what's happening. Then the other data set that has been used quite frequently, and I think then this is a strong indicator for the use of the heartbeat data set, is the reset data set that was created last year on the impacts of COVID by the X Factor team, and also the survey that was run by Survey Matters last year, and there were 2 iterations of that. That is also still in the platform, publicly available. And so my sense on that, Natalie, is that in fact the heartbeat data set, your data set, will really be used as a strong asset, and we'll be able to report that back to everybody as well. And Ricky's jumped in there too. Thanks, Ricky, for the update on all the masterclasses. I really appreciate you letting everyone know that. That's awesome. So that's the kind of data. I think it's always really important to get the local insights, and we are advocating every moment we can about making sure that data is shared, not only from government agencies that have access to data that's really important for local decision making, and by that I mean state-based agencies such as, for example, education or health, or regional agencies, or depending on where you are, of course, they're all different names. We advocate really strongly for that to enable safe sharing into local communities, and also really want local communities and local organisations to think about bringing in their own data. So you can do that in the SEER platform, and I can see that we've got our friends from Gladstone who we're going to be supporting to bring in their local data, because that's the community knowledge, that's the local information, and that we want to make available for your decision making.
Great, thanks, Christy. And we've got a question here, which is about how we actually get funders to listen to what the report says. And I suppose funders can be viewed across government, philanthropy, corporates, local council, and everything in between. And I guess the part of the question is about how do we make applications more simple and remove red tape. So Julia Keady has posted something in the chat today which was fantastic, about a working group that is looking at innovating grant making and grant seeking practice. And I think that this kind of data, and she's noted that she can plug some of this data and report into that conversation. So it's really, I think, partly about informing funders and opening up the conversation, and creating a more level playing field in terms of recognising A, the role and the impact of your organisations, and B, the partnership potential that funders can have, and just really shifting some of the some of the value that's placed in the work that you do actually helps funders to understand that you will get better outcomes if they can work more flexibly with you. I think the challenge is not all funders can, and there are limitations, and we just have to accept that that's really part of life, but it becomes part of a skill development piece, and thinking about how we support rural communities to compete effectively in that environment, whilst where we can get change, working on that. So philanthropic foundations are probably where there's the greatest scope for innovation in grant making. And certainly Ftripler will be continuing to work on our practices, and we'll be continuing to talk with our sector peers and our funding partners about what this means. And I think it's behaviour change, and it's really shifting long-held patterns of ways that things are done. So if nothing else, we hope that this survey starts a conversation that actually enables at least consideration of what better could be. And I would encourage all of you to have the conversation, and in any of your funding applications, use this data to back up your case. Talk to your local councils, talk to your local businesses, and it's really a collective effort to try and get this operating better for everybody. It'll benefit everyone if we do this better. So at the moment, that is all the questions. I just wanted to quickly respond. I think Sue put a comment in the chat earlier just about the additional challenges in transitioning economies in particular, and an interest in seeing information about supports or networking or funding for towns like those in Latrobe Valley. And of course there will be challenges in other areas. Certainly feel free to give us a call, so we'd love to talk to you about that. I agree, there's a huge need and a huge opportunity to support many communities across the country that are going to be transitioning. Data is an important tool in that work, but also resourcing the efforts of communities to really, I think, take control of the agenda for their communities and develop the collaboration and the networks that can really help to strengthen the potential and make sure it's an inclusive transition ultimately. So thank you for that, Sue. Well, if there are no further questions, there are a few links pasted in the chat for you all, which is the registration to the data sets and the master classes. So I really do hope that you take advantage of that opportunity and keep on reaching out to us if you want to dig into the data any further. I'm sure either the SEER team or the Ftripler team would be very happy to talk to any of you. So with that, we will say thank you, keep in touch. Our contact details are just there on the screen, and we look forward to taking this further with you, and hope you found it valuable.